Imagine walking through the Amazon rainforest and stumbling upon a massive stone city, perfectly preserved but completely abandoned. No signs of warfare, no bodies, no explanation for why an entire civilization simply vanished into thin air. This isn't science fiction. This has happened not once, not twice, but dozens of times throughout human history. Right now, beneath your feet, under dense jungles, scorching deserts, and even modern cities, lie the remains of advanced civilizations that thrived for centuries before mysteriously disappearing. Some left behind impossible architectural feats that we still can't replicate today. Others possess knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered for thousands of years. And the most unsettling part? We have absolutely no idea what happened to them. Today, we're diving deep into 7 lost civilizations that have left historians, archaeologists, and scientists completely baffled. These aren't just ancient ruins we're talking about. These are sophisticated societies that developed complex writing systems, built monumental structures, and created technologies that shouldn't have existed in their time. Yet they all share one terrifying common thread. They all vanished without a trace, leaving behind more questions than answers. Civilization 1, the Indus Valley Civilization. Our journey begins in what is now Pakistan and northwest India, where one of humanity's most advanced ancient civilizations flourished along the banks of the Indus River. Between 2600 and 1900 BCE, the Indus Valley Civilization was home to over 5 million people living in more than 1,000 cities and settlements. To put this in perspective, while most of the world was still living in small tribal communities, the Indus Valley had already developed urban planning that would make modern city planners jealous. Picture this: streets laid out in perfect grid patterns, sophisticated drainage systems running beneath every house, standardized weights and measures used across hundreds of miles, and multi-story buildings with private bathrooms and running water. The largest cities, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, were engineering marvels. Every home had access to fresh water through an intricate system of wells and channels. The sewage system was so advanced that it included manholes for maintenance and inspection. But here's where it gets mysterious. Despite being one of the world's first urban civilizations, we know almost nothing about the people who built these incredible cities. They left behind thousands of artifacts covered in a script that no one has been able to decipher. Not a single word. Imagine trying to understand an entire civilization through pictures alone, and you'll begin to grasp the frustration archaeologists feel when studying the Indus Valley. What makes their disappearance even more puzzling is how sudden and complete it was. Around 1900 BCE, these thriving metropolises were simply abandoned. There are no signs of warfare, no evidence of natural disasters, no indication of disease or famine. The people just left. Archaeological evidence shows that in the final phases, the quality of life declined dramatically. The precise urban planning gave way to haphazard construction. The sophisticated drainage systems fell into disrepair. Some theories suggest climate change caused the Indus River to change course, making agriculture impossible. Others propose that a series of earthquakes disrupted their water supply. But none of these theories explain why such an advanced civilization couldn't adapt or relocate. After all, they had already built one of the world's most sophisticated urban networks. Why couldn't they build another? The most haunting aspect of their disappearance is how thoroughly they seem to have vanished from human memory. Unlike other ancient civilizations that lived on in myths and legends, the Indus Valley Civilization left no cultural descendants, no stories passed down through generations. no trace in the historical records of neighboring peoples. It's as if 5 million people and their entire way of life simply evaporated from existence. Civilization 2. The Minoans. From the banks of the Indus River, we travel west to the sun-soaked island of Crete in the Mediterranean Sea, where another mystery awaits. The Minoan civilization, named after the legendary King Minos, dominated the eastern Mediterranean from approximately 2700 to 1100 BCE. They built the world's first palaces, created stunning frescoes that still take your breath away today, and their art depicts festivals, ceremonies, and celebrations rather than warfare and conquest. Women held positions of power, and their society appeared to worship a mother goddess figure. But the Minoans also left behind one of archaeology's most enduring puzzles, the Palace of Knossos and its legendary labyrinth. When British archaeologist Arthur Evans excavated Knossos in the early 1900s, he discovered a massive complex with over 1,300 rooms connected by corridors so intricate that they seemed designed to confuse anyone trying to navigate them. The walls were covered in frescoes depicting strange rituals, including young people leaping over charging bulls in what appeared to be a dangerous ceremonial sport. These discoveries gave birth to theories connecting the palace to the Greek myth of the Minotaur, the half-man, half-bull creature that demanded human sacrifices in an underground maze. Could these myths have been based on real Minoan practices? The bull-leaping frescoes suggest that bulls held special significance in Minoan religion, and the palace's confusing layout does resemble a labyrinth. But here's what really makes the Minoans mysterious. They developed two separate writing systems that we still cannot fully understand. The earlier system, called Linear A, remains completely undeciphered despite decades of effort by linguists and codebreakers. The later system, Linear B, was finally deciphered in the 1950s, but it revealed something shocking. It wasn't Minoan at all. It was an early form of Greek, suggesting that mainland Greeks had taken over Crete. The Minoan civilization's end came in waves. Around 1450 BCE, most of their palaces were destroyed, possibly by the catastrophic eruption of the volcano on the nearby island of Thera. This explosion was one of the largest in recorded history, sending tsunamis crashing across the Mediterranean and covering Crete in volcanic ash. Some researchers believe this disaster inspired Plato's story of Atlantis, a powerful island civilization destroyed in a single day and night. Yet even after this catastrophe, some Minoan settlements survived for several more centuries. The final chapter of their story remains unclear. Did they gradually assimilate with Greek invaders? Were they conquered by force? Or did their civilization simply fade away as trade networks collapsed and their unique culture was forgotten? Civilization 3. The Olmecs. Crossing the Atlantic, we find ourselves in the humid lowlands of what is now Mexico, where another enigmatic civilization left behind some of the most striking and mysterious monuments in the Americas. The Olmecs, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, flourished from around 1200 to 400 BCE. They were the first civilization in the Americas to develop many features that would later define cultures like the Maya and Aztecs: monumental architecture, a complex calendar system, and a sophisticated understanding of astronomy. But the Olmecs are best known for something truly extraordinary: their colossal heads. These massive stone sculptures, some weighing up to 50 tons and standing nearly 10 feet tall, depict human faces with distinctly African features. 17 of these heads have been discovered so far, each one unique, carved from single blocks of basalt, that had to be transported from quarries over 60 miles away through dense jungle terrain. Here's where things get controversial. The African features of these sculptures have led some researchers to propose that ancient Africans reached the Americas thousands of years before Columbus. The faces depicted in the colossal heads have broad noses, full lips, and other characteristics that don't match the typical features of indigenous American populations. Could these heads be evidence of transoceanic contact in ancient times? Mainstream archaeology largely rejects this theory, arguing that the features simply represent the natural diversity of indigenous American populations. But the debate continues, especially when you consider other puzzling aspects of Olmec culture. They possessed advanced knowledge of mathematics and astronomy that seems to have appeared suddenly in the archaeological record. Their calendar system was incredibly sophisticated, and they may have been the first people in the Americas to use the concept of zero in mathematics. The Olmecs also created one of the earliest writing systems in the Americas. Symbols carved on stone monuments and jade artifacts suggest they had developed a form of hieroglyphic writing centuries before the Maya. Unfortunately, most Olmec texts remain undeciphered, leaving us to guess at the meaning of their elaborate symbols and the stories they were trying to tell. Perhaps most mysteriously, Olmec religious beliefs centered around a were-jaguar deity, half human and half jaguar, that appears throughout their art. Some sculptures depict babies with jaguar features, suggesting they believed in supernatural transformations. Archaeological evidence indicates they may have practiced ritualistic bloodletting and possibly human sacrifice in caves that they considered sacred portals to the underworld. The decline of Olmec civilization is as mysterious as its rise. Around 400 BCE, their major centers were systematically destroyed and abandoned. Some sites show evidence of intentional monument destruction, with colossal heads deliberately buried and temple platforms torn down. Was this the result of warfare, internal revolt, or some kind of ritualistic abandonment? We may never know. What we do know is that the Olmecs left an indelible mark on Mesoamerican civilization. The Maya, Aztecs, and other later cultures inherited many Olmec innovations, from their calendar system to their religious symbolism. Yet the original creators of these innovations remain largely anonymous, their true identity lost to time, along with the secrets of how they moved 50-ton stones through jungle terrain over 3,000 years ago. Civilization 4, the Nazca, high in the arid plateaus of southern Peru, another ancient mystery awaits discovery. The Nazca civilization, which flourished from 100 to 700 CE, is famous for creating one of the world's most perplexing archaeological puzzles, the Nazca Lines. These massive geoglyphs, etched into the desert floor, depict animals, plants, and geometric shapes so large they can only be fully appreciated from the air. The question that has haunted researchers for decades is simple yet profound. Why would an ancient people create massive artworks that they themselves could never properly see? The Nazca Lines cover an area of nearly 500 square kilometers. Some of the individual figures stretch over 200 meters in length. There's a monkey with a spiraling tail, a hummingbird with wings spread wide, a spider so anatomically correct that it helps scientists identify the specific species it represents. The geometric patterns are even more impressive, perfectly straight lines that run for kilometers across the desert, maintaining their direction despite crossing valleys, hills, and ravines. Creating these massive designs would have required incredible planning and organizational skills. The Nazca people had to map out each figure perfectly, scale it up to enormous proportions, and execute the design by removing the dark surface rocks to reveal the lighter soil beneath. The dry climate of the Atacama Desert has preserved these lines for over 1,000 years, but the precision of their construction still amazes engineers today. But the lines are just one part of the Nazca mystery. Archaeological excavations have revealed a civilization obsessed with water in one of the world's driest places. The Nazca engineered an incredible system of underground aqueducts called puquios, some of which still function today. These underground channels, built with precisely fitted stones, carried water from mountain springs to the desert settlements. Channels, built with precisely fitted stones, carried water from mountain springs to the desert settlements. The engineering required to build these aqueducts rivals that of the famous Roman water systems. Recent discoveries have added new layers to the Nazca enigma. In 2020, archaeologists using advanced imaging technology discovered over 140 new geoglyphs, many depicting human figures and dating to an earlier period than the famous animal designs. These humanoid figures are smaller and located on hillsides where they would have been visible to people on the ground, suggesting that the purpose of the Nazca lines may have evolved over time. The theories about why the Nazca created these massive ground drawings are as varied as they are fascinating. Some researchers believe they were astronomical calendars, with certain lines pointing to significant celestial events. Others suggest they were part of religious ceremonies, perhaps designed to be seen by sky gods. The most controversial theory, popularized in the 1960s, proposed that the lines were landing strips for ancient astronauts, though this idea lacks any scientific evidence. More recent research has focused on the line's relationship to water. Many of the geoglyphs are located near underground water sources, and some researchers believe they were part of elaborate water-related ceremonies. In a desert, where water meant the difference between life and death, it makes sense that the Nazca would have developed complex rituals to ensure the continued flow of their precious aqueducts. The mystery deepens when we consider what happened to the Nazca people themselves. Around 700 CE, their civilization began to decline, possibly due to a series of severe droughts that made their desert homeland uninhabitable. The elaborate aqueduct system that had sustained them for centuries began to fail. Archaeological evidence suggests that social upheaval followed, with increasing warfare and the abandonment of major ceremonial centers. By 1000 CE, the Nazca had largely vanished from the historical record, absorbed by expanding highland cultures or scattered by environmental pressures. They left behind no written language, no detailed historical accounts, and no clear explanation for their most famous creation. The Nazca lines remain in the desert, silent sentinels watching over a landscape that once supported a thriving civilization, but now harbors only wind, sand, and enduring questions about human ingenuity and purpose. Civilization 5, the Anasazi, Ancestral Puebloans. In the rugged canyons and mesas of the American Southwest, we encounter one of North America's most sophisticated prehistoric civilizations. The Ancestral Puebloans, formerly known as the Anasazi, built some of the continent's most impressive architectural achievements in one of its most challenging environments. From approximately 100 to 1300 CE, they created a complex society that stretched across what is now Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. The most spectacular remnants of their civilization are the cliff dwellings, carved into canyon walls hundreds of feet above valley floors. Mesa Verde in Colorado, Canyon de Chelly in Arizona, and dozens of other sites preserve these incredible structures that seem to defy gravity itself. The most famous, Cliff Palace at Mesa Verde, contains over 150 rooms and could house around 100 people. But what's truly remarkable is that these dwellings were built without metal tools, draft animals, or wheels. Every stone was shaped by hand and carried up treacherous cliff faces using nothing but human strength and ingenuity. But the cliff dwellings represent only the final chapter of ancestral Puebloan civilization. For over 1,000 years, they lived in villages on mesa tops, developing sophisticated farming techniques that allowed them to thrive in an environment that receives less than 10 inches of rainfall per year. They built elaborate irrigation systems, created check dams to prevent soil erosion, and developed drought-resistant varieties of corn, beans, and squash. Their social organization was equally impressive. Major centers like Chaco Canyon in New Mexico served as regional hubs connecting dozens of outlying communities through an extensive network of roads. These roads, some stretching for hundreds of miles, were built in perfectly straight lines, regardless of terrain. They crossed canyons on elaborate staircases carved into rock faces and maintained consistent widths even when easier routes were available nearby. Chaco Canyon itself was an architectural marvel. The great houses built there, such as Pueblo Bonito, contained hundreds of rooms arranged in precise geometric patterns. Some walls rose 4 stories high and incorporated millions of carefully shaped stones. The buildings were oriented to track solar and lunar cycles, and their construction required importing timber from forests over 50 miles away. Archaeological evidence suggests that Chaco Canyon was not just a population center, but a ceremonial hub that drew people from across the region for religious gatherings and trade. Perhaps most mysteriously, the ancestral Puebloans seemed to possess astronomical knowledge that allowed them to create sophisticated calendar systems. At sites throughout their territory, archaeologists have discovered petroglyphs and architectural features that precisely mark solstices, equinoxes, and lunar cycles. Some rock art sites serve as complex astronomical observatories that tracked celestial events with remarkable accuracy. But around 1130 CE, something began to go wrong. Tree ring data shows that the region entered a period of severe drought that lasted for decades. Archaeological evidence from this period tells a disturbing story. Skeletal remains show signs of malnutrition and violence. Some sites contain evidence of cannibalism, suggesting that social order began to break down as resources became scarce. The response of the ancestral Puebloans to this crisis was to retreat to increasingly defensive positions. They abandoned their mesa-top villages and moved into the cliff dwellings that we marvel at today. These spectacular structures, while impressive, represent a civilization under siege. The cliff dwellings were essentially fortresses, accessible only by precarious handholds carved into rock faces and easily defendable against attackers. For over a century, they held out in these cliffside refuges, maintaining their culture and continuing to create beautiful pottery and intricate basketry. But the environmental pressures proved too great. By 1300 CE, even the cliff dwellings were abandoned. The entire Four Corners region, which had supported tens of thousands of people for over a millennium, was left virtually empty. What happened to the ancestral Puebloans after they left their cliff dwellings remains one of archaeology's great mysteries. Most researchers believe they migrated south and east, eventually becoming the ancestors of modern Pueblo peoples like the Hopi and Zuni. But the transition was so complete that many specific cultural traditions were lost forever. The sophisticated road networks fell into disuse, the great ceremonial centers were abandoned to the elements, and the knowledge of how to build massive stone structures using only primitive tools disappeared. Today, modern Pueblo peoples consider the abandoned cliff dwellings sacred sites and maintain that their ancestors didn't disappear, but transformed. According to their oral traditions, The migration from the ancient homeland was part of a prophetic journey that continues to this day. While this provides cultural continuity, it doesn't answer the archaeological questions about how such an advanced civilization could vanish so completely from one of North America's most distinctive landscapes. Civilization 6, the Khmer Empire. Deep in the jungles of Cambodia stands one of humanity's most magnificent architectural achievements, Angkor Wat. This massive temple complex, covering over 400 acres, was built by the Khmer Empire at the height of their power in the early 12th century. But Angkor Wat is just the crown jewel of a civilization that once ruled over much of Southeast Asia and built one of the world's largest pre-industrial cities. At its peak, around 1200 CE, the Khmer Empire controlled territory from Myanmar to Vietnam, and from southern China to the Malay Peninsula. The capital city of Angkor was home to over 1 million people, making it larger than any European city of the time. The empire's wealth came from its mastery of water management in a region where survival depended on successfully navigating the extremes of monsoon seasons and dry periods. The Khmer engineered one of history's most sophisticated hydraulic systems. They built massive reservoirs called barays that could hold millions of gallons of water. These reservoirs were connected by an intricate network of canals and channels that distributed water throughout the empire for irrigation, transportation, and urban needs. The largest reservoir, the West Baray, measures 5 miles long by 1.3 miles wide and still holds water today. But the Khmer weren't just master engineers. They were also incredible artists and architects. The temples they built throughout their empire represent some of humanity's greatest architectural achievements. Angkor Wat itself required an estimated 300,000 workers and 6,000 elephants to complete. The temple's 5 central towers represent the peaks of Mount Meru, the center of the universe in Hindu cosmology. The entire complex is oriented to align with astronomical events, and its galleries contain over 3,000 apsara, celestial dancer, carvings, no two exactly alike. The scale of Khmer construction projects defies comprehension. The Temple of Bayon features 216 massive stone faces, each carved with a serene smile. Ta Prohm, made famous by movies like Tomb Raider, showcases what happens when jungle reclaims human achievement, with massive silk cotton trees growing through temple walls. Across the empire, the Khmer built over 1,000 temples, each one demonstrating remarkable artistic skill and engineering expertise. Yet for all their architectural grandeur, many aspects of Khmer society remain mysterious. The empire's writing system, based on Sanskrit, has been partially deciphered, but many inscriptions still puzzle scholars. We know that Khmer society was highly stratified, with god-kings at the top and elaborate court ceremonies that reinforced royal power. Archaeological evidence suggests they practiced human sacrifice and may have believed their rulers possessed divine powers. The empire's religious beliefs evolved over time from Hinduism to Buddhism, and this transition is reflected in their architecture. Earlier temples like Angkor Wat were dedicated to Hindu gods, particularly Vishnu. Later temples incorporated Buddhist imagery and philosophy. This religious evolution may have contributed to social tensions that weakened the empire from within. The decline of the Khmer Empire was as dramatic as its rise. By the 15th century, Angkor was largely abandoned, and the capital had moved to Phnom Penh. Several factors contributed to this collapse. Climate data suggests that the region experienced severe droughts in the 14th and 15th centuries, followed by destructive floods. The sophisticated water management system that had sustained the empire for centuries began to fail. Military pressures also played a role. The Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya repeatedly attacked Khmer territory, and the empire's resources were increasingly devoted to defense, rather than the massive construction projects that had defined earlier periods. Trade routes shifted as maritime commerce became more important than overland routes, reducing the economic advantages of Angkor's inland location. But perhaps the most intriguing aspect of the Khmer Empire's decline is how completely Angkor was forgotten by the outside world. European explorers in the 19th century were amazed to discover massive temple complexes hidden in the jungle, as if an entire civilization had vanished overnight. Local people knew about the ruins, of course, but the scale and sophistication of what the Khmer had achieved seemed impossible to believe. French archaeologist Henri Mouhot, who brought Angkor to Western attention in 1860, wrote that the temples rivaled anything built by the ancient Romans and represented the work of some ancient Michelangelo. Yet when he asked local villagers who had built these incredible structures, they could only say that they were the work of gods or giants, not ordinary humans. Recent archaeological discoveries using advanced radar technology have revealed that Angkor was even larger and more complex than previously imagined. The city covered over 1,000 square kilometers and included elaborate urban planning with neighborhoods, industrial areas, and agricultural zones. This makes the empire's disappearance even more puzzling. How does a civilization that successfully managed the lives of over 1 million people for centuries simply fade away? Civilization 7, Easter Island, Rapa Nui. Our final destination takes us to one of the most remote inhabited places on Earth, Easter Island, or Rapa Nui as it's known to its Polynesian inhabitants. This tiny speck of land in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, over 2,000 miles from the nearest populated area, is home to one of archaeology's most haunting mysteries: nearly 900 massive stone statues, called moai, that gaze eternally across the island's windswept landscape. The story of Easter Island begins with one of humanity's most remarkable maritime achievements. Sometime between 300 and 800 CE, Polynesian voyagers crossed thousands of miles of open ocean in small wooden boats to reach this isolated island. Using only their knowledge of stars, currents, and weather patterns, they navigated to a piece of land just 64 square miles in size. The fact that they found Easter Island at all represents an incredible feat of seamanship and courage. Once they arrived, the Rapa Nui people created a unique civilization adapted to their isolated environment. They developed their own written language, called Rongo Rongo, which remains largely undeciphered today. They created elaborate ceremonial sites and developed a complex social hierarchy centered around the worship of ancestors. But their most famous achievement was the creation of the moai statues that have captured imaginations around the world. These statues are far more impressive than most people realize. The largest completed moai stands 33 feet tall and weighs 82 tons. They were carved from volcanic rock at a quarry site called Rano Raraku, using only stone tools. But here's what makes them truly mysterious. Most of the statues were somehow transported from the quarry to ceremonial platforms called ahu, located around the island's perimeter. Some of these journeys covered over 10 miles across rough terrain. For decades, archaeologists couldn't figure out how the Rapa Nui people moved these massive statues. The island had no large trees that could serve as rollers, no draft animals, and no metal tools. Various theories were proposed, from wooden rollers made from palm trees to elaborate ramp and pulley systems. But in 2012, researchers made a startling discovery. The statues were designed to walk. By attaching ropes to a replica statue and rocking it back and forth, the research team demonstrated that the Moai could actually be moved upright across the landscape. The statue's distinctive shape, with large heads and bodies that lean slightly forward, creates a center of gravity that allows them to rock from side to side while maintaining balance. This discovery aligned with Rapa Nui oral traditions that claimed the statues walked to their final destinations. But the story of Easter Island isn't just about engineering marvels. It's also a cautionary tale about environmental collapse. When the Polynesian settlers arrived, the island was covered with forests of giant palm trees. Archaeological evidence shows that within a few centuries, these forests had been completely destroyed. The last tree on Easter Island was cut down sometime around 1400 CE. The deforestation had catastrophic consequences. Without trees to build boats, the Rapa Nui people could no longer fish in deep waters or maintain contact with other Pacific islands. Without wood for construction, they could no longer build houses or move the massive Moai statues. The topsoil, no longer held in place by tree roots, eroded away, making agriculture increasingly difficult. As resources became scarce, Rapa Nui society began to collapse. Archaeological evidence from this period tells a disturbing story of warfare, social upheaval, and possibly cannibalism. The elaborate statue construction projects ceased. Many Moai were deliberately toppled from their ceremonial platforms. The complex social hierarchy that had sustained the island's culture for over 1,000 years disintegrated. By the time European explorers reached Easter Island in 1722, they found a population of only about 3,000 people, living in caves and struggling to survive on a largely barren landscape. The Dutch captain, who first encountered the island, described it as desolate and wondered how such a small, impoverished population could have created the massive stone statues that dominated the landscape. The situation became even worse in the 19th century when slave raiders from Peru kidnapped over 1,500 islanders, including most of the tribal leaders and knowledge keepers. Diseases brought by European contact further devastated the population. By 1877, only 111 Rapa Nui people remained alive on their ancestral homeland. This dramatic population collapse meant that much of the island's cultural knowledge was lost forever. The ability to read Rongo Rongo script disappeared with the last knowledgeable practitioners. The oral traditions that preserved the island's history were severely disrupted. Even the knowledge of how to carve and move the Moai statues vanished. Today, Easter Island serves as a powerful symbol of how even sophisticated civilizations can collapse when they exceed their environment's carrying capacity. Some researchers argue that the island's story represents a preview of what could happen to our entire planet if we continue to overexploit natural resources. The haunting presence of the Moai statues, standing silent watch over a landscape that once supported a thriving culture, reminds us that no civilization is immune to the consequences of environmental destruction. As we've journeyed through these 7 lost civilizations, certain patterns begin to emerge. Each of these societies achieved remarkable levels of sophistication in engineering, architecture, astronomy, and social organization. Yet they all share a common fate. They disappeared, leaving behind more questions than answers. Some vanished suddenly, like the Indus Valley Civilization, which abandoned its cities with no apparent explanation. Others declined gradually, like the Khmer Empire, which slowly retreated from its magnificent capital at Angkor. Some, like Easter Island, collapsed due to environmental pressures they helped create. Others, like the Minoans, may have been destroyed by natural disasters beyond their control. But what's most haunting about these lost civilizations is not just that they disappeared, but how completely they vanished from human memory. The Indus Valley script remains undeciphered after a century of effort. The Olmec colossal heads stare at us with faces we cannot identify. The Nazca lines stretch across the desert with meanings we can only guess. The Moai of Easter Island stand silent, their builders' knowledge lost forever. Perhaps this is the most sobering lesson these civilizations offer us, that knowledge, culture, and even entire ways of life are far more fragile than we like to believe. Despite our modern technology and global communication networks, we are not immune to the forces that brought down these ancient societies. Climate change, environmental degradation, social upheaval, and natural disasters continue to threaten human civilizations today. The mysteries of these 7 lost civilizations remind us that human history is far more complex and fragile than we often acknowledge. Each of these societies represented thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, artistic achievement, and cultural development. Yet they all vanished, taking their secrets with them into the darkness of forgotten time. As you go about your daily life, remember that beneath your feet, hidden in jungles, buried under desert sands, or submerged beneath rising seas, lie the remains of countless other civilizations we haven't even discovered yet. Each one represents a unique experiment in human organization, a different answer to the question of how we should live together on this planet. The next time you see a news story about archaeological discoveries, or visit a museum with artifacts from ancient cultures, or even just walk through your own city, consider this. What will future archaeologists make of our civilization if it too one day becomes a mystery? What would they think of our skyscrapers and highways, our computers and smartphones, our art and literature? Will they be able to decipher our languages, understand our beliefs, and explain why our civilization thrived for a time before perhaps joining the ranks of history's great mysteries? Or will we be the generation that finally learns from the past, that takes the warnings these lost civilizations offer us, and builds a society that can endure? The choice, unlike the fate of these 7 lost civilizations, is still ours to make. But as their silent ruins remind us, time may be shorter than we think, and the margin for error smaller than we dare to imagine. What other secrets do you think these lost civilizations are still hiding? The mystery continues, and perhaps somewhere out there, the next great archaeological discovery is waiting to rewrite everything we thought we knew about human history.